You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The views expressed by the individuals during this broadcast are their own opinions, and they may not be the same as those of their group or other organizations they may be involved with.
All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Oh yeah, baby, that's lovely.
Good morning, it's November the 20th, and welcome to Psychedelics and Cannabis Educational News. We're live here at paceradio.net and 420pace.ca. As you notice, Cindy's not here this morning. She has the day off, but I have 5 stories for today's show that I hope will warm things up on this cold and frosty morning. I don't know about you, but I know here when I walked outside this morning, it was just frost and fog. Everything that was from the moisture from the fog just covered everything, and everything out there was covered in frost this morning. So hopefully it warms up some today and gets rid of that frost and get some outdoor activities done. So other than that, it's time for me to get started on the news. The first story of the day comes to me from the Cannabis Business Times. Headline on it says that U.S. Congresswoman unveils bill to repeal federal hemp product ban. U.S. House Rep Nancy Mace filed draft legislation on November the 17th that she's sponsoring to repeal the federal government's new definition of hemp before it takes effect on November the 13th, 2026. Now, this new definition intends to prohibit cannabinoids that are synthesized or manufactured outside of the plant, such as Delta-8 THC and HHC, and limited hemp-derived cannabinoid products to 0.4 milligrams of THC per container. Now, Mace's proposal, the American Hemp Protection Act of 2025, would simply repeal the federal government's hemp-related provisions that were included in last week's continuing resolution, specifically all of Section 781 of the Continuing Appropriations Legislative Branch. Now, Military Construction and Veteran Affairs and Extension Act 2026. Gee, they have long names for acts. Now, while Mace ultimately voted in favor of the continuing resolution in last week's 222 to 209 House roll call to reopen the government, she went on the congressional record on November the 12th that she strongly opposed Section 781 because it would deal a fatal blow to American farmers supplying the regulated hemp industry and small businesses and jeopardize tens of billions of dollars in economic activity. Now, rather than have a substantive open debate on the future of hemp policy in America, prohibitionists slipped this provision bill into a must-pass government funding bill, forcing members of Congress to choose between voting their conscience on hemp and paying our military service members, she has said. And she says this is wrong. Now, according to Mace, the U.S. hemp industry has stepped forward to self-regulate in the absence of federal clarity on the 2018 Farm Bill, which fairly legalized the commercial cultivation of hemp as an agricultural commodity. Now, according to Mace, many hemp businesses have been asking Congress to pass legislation that reasonably or responsibly regulates the industry. She says, rather than, got something in the way, dealing with this framework to protect children and allow adults to make informed decisions, Section 781 of this bill essentially imposes a national ban of all ingestible hemp products with any qualifiable level of THC, which represents between 90 and 95% of hemp products in the marketplace, including the vast majority of non-intoxicating CBD products offering in the marketplace. And she makes a lot of sense. I know some people can take her both ways, but in the cannabis file, she's been doing a lot of fighting, and she continues to do so here. And against her own government, her own party on that. So it's good to see that she's fighting, and others are as well, in order to get the hemp ban gone. And it makes sense. There's no reason for it to continue, even though it's only not even a week old, because it's got a year before it gets implemented. But hopefully the Congress people can make a change in that, and the hemp industry will be able to thrive instead of being cut off at the knees, going back to the old ways, basically. All right, time for me to move on to the next story. This one comes to me from the Marijuana Moment. Headline on it says, federal judge calls out DEA over delay on psychedelic church's petition to use ayahuasca in religious ceremonies. Now, the story says a lawyer for the DEA faced a grilling by a federal appeals court over delays in a request for a religious group to use the psychedelic ayahuasca in their practice, a complaint similar to one that cannabis reform advocates had vented over decades amid repeated efforts to end federal cannabis prohibition. Now, the DEA has been largely sitting on a religious exemption petition from the Ayahuasca Church of Iowa for about 6 years, leading to a lawsuit that was heard by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit on Friday. This guy getting a drink here. Now, an attorney representing the DEA told judges that the agency has compelling interest in conducting a full and thorough investigation about whether an exception can be made to the Controlled Substances Act based on referral or any other statute, and that warrants the protracted review process. There was skepticism among judges on the appeals court panel, with one stating that it should be maybe a months-long process to review exception petitions and issue a ruling, not a years-long process. This is not breaking massive new ground to work out these details, they said during the oral arguments. Now, the DEA attorney told the court that it's very complicated, and this case is very different from other religious exceptions, cases like that deal with the CSA. That's partly because the agency must ensure that ayahuasca that's imported by the church is appropriately sourced. One of the appeals court judges said that from this perspective, this is less about complexity and sensitivity of the decision, which may very well be true. But I don't know how I can look at this record and think anyone at the DEA was going to do anything about this case for the past 15 months. Now, in addition to the church's request to obtain and use the psychedelic in its practices, it has also sought tax exemption status as a religious institution under the Religious Freedom Act. So we'll see what happens. I'll keep an eye on this and see if they have a ruling on that religious end of things and what the final result is in this case. So it's always nice to follow up on cases, stories. And I have one of those actually coming up, not this story, but the one after me. It's a follow-up story. But this one here, we think we look at it as cannabis is legal here in Canada. People grow their cannabis, people go to the store and buy their cannabis. But not every province, some people may not know, can grow cannabis. Like Quebec, Supreme Court of Canada agreed that they can stop their citizens in Quebec from growing cannabis. That's not all Quebec cut short of, and that also included vape pens. Maybe people may not know about that. There was food at one point that has been added, but at one point it wasn't even included. It's been a real slow process. there when it comes to Quebec. So here we go. This story comes to me from StratCan. And the headline says the SQDC to launch cannabis vapes on November the 26th. Great. Another week from now before it's even legal for them to buy vape pens in Quebec. So the Société Québec de Cannabis will begin selling cannabis vape products on November the 26th. While the agency had previously announced an end of November launch for cannabis vapes, it shared the official date in a press release on November the 18th. They say, according to Genevieve Garreau, Vice President of Responsible Marketing and Supply Chain at the SQDC, DC, says, we have chosen to make vaping products available in order to offer a regulated alternative. Vaping is a method of consumption that has grown in recent years and is currently used by 28% of Quebec consumers, even though it's illegal. Although it possesses health risks, the lack of legal option until new constituents, an even greater risk due to the dangerous nature of the products available on the legal market, they say. Now, since there has been no legal source for cannabis vapes in Quebec, residents told the ISQ that they source their vapes from family and friends, legal sources in other provinces, illegal suppliers, or online. All products will have to be adhere to Quebec's 30% THC limit. A 30% cap on THC limits when it comes to vape pens. Wow. Let's see. It also says that it applies to all products, including concentrates like vapes. Now, in addition, no additional flavors can be added to these products except for cannabis-derived terpenes that are already in the product. Now, a representative with the SQDC told StratCan earlier this year that it expects 30 different vapes at the launch of the program. So the vapes are coming to Quebec. It says here no added flavors can be added to the product. Now I know that you can go and get resin. That there's nothing added to it, but I have seen vape pens. Well, there's some that have added terpenes to it. Now they say that they're terpenes from cannabis. They're going to be allowed, but there's others that are called flavor agents. I've seen that on vape cartridges, and I refuse to buy those now, being that if they're not going to tell you what it is, I'm sure they're not going to inhale it. So, alrighty. That's my rant for the day. So, Quebec, vape pens. Start getting them next week at this time. And for those who've never had access to a vape pen, there is some convenience to them. I know that. That's from my experience. Anyways, so all right, time for me to move on to that story I was saying was a follow-up. And patients in Canada, I've had calls over the years where patients are very concerned about driving. Or even though they may not have consumed that morning, they get up and they go for a drive. Even though they haven't consumed cannabis in maybe like 36 hours, 24 hours, they're still going to show that they are positive, over the 5 nanogram limit, or even the 2 nanogram limit, where they can put you under suspension. So we're going to head off to Australia, because there, according to the Hemp Gazette and the headline, it says that medical cannabis driving defense bill for New South Wales is what that stands for. Yes, in Australia's state of New South Wales, Sydney MP Alex Greenwich is introducing a bill for fairer driving laws for medical cannabis users. Now, in New South Wales, as in most other Australian states, there is no legal defense for driving while having a detectable THC level. Here we have the 2 nanogram for suspension and 5 nanograms for look out, you're in big trouble. Then they say whether or not a medical cannabis has been prescribed and accessed legally. Same here in Canada. As THC can remain detectable for up to weeks after last consumption, driving laws in their current form are in effect a ban on driving for patients using medical cannabis, as even CBD preparations can have trace levels of THC. There is no medical defense in these offenses specified in the Road Transport Act of 2013 for using prescribed cannabis medicine. I don't know of any here in Canada as well. There are also may also be insurance implications for patients who are convicted of these offenses. Now, Alex Greenwich wants the law changed. Now, in September, he teamed up with legalized cannabis parties Jeremy Buckingham to design reforms, and that work is now complete. They say the proposed legislation would initially allow drivers who test positive to cannabis to have the offense overturned in court on medical grounds. After 6 months, drivers will not be subject to a penalty notice if they have evidence that the THC was lawfully used, such as a medical prescription, and if the police officer is of the reasonable belief that they are not driving under the influence of THC or otherwise impaired. Now, the proposed legislation would initially allow drivers who test positive to cannabis to have the offense overturned in court on medical grounds. Yeah, and as I mentioned, the 6 months driver's notice. So we need something. It'd be nice to have something here in Canada where, or even anywhere actually, where a patient has the right and the ability to use medical purposes as a defense. It'd be nice if they didn't even have to get charged in the first place, but unfortunately, I can't see that happening right now. So, but if they were allowed to use it as a medical defense, and they said that even if the officer doesn't think that they're impaired, well, usually if an officer doesn't think they're impaired, then why would they even charge them in the first place? So, all righty, time for me to move on and head to the last story of the day, and I'll just get that lined up. And where did it go? There it is. Okay. Last story of the day comes to me from the Marijuana Moment. And the headline on that says Trump DOJ declines to file Supreme Court brief in marijuana company's case challenging federal prohibition. Now, the Justice Department is declining the opportunity to file a brief on whether the U.S. Supreme Court should take up a case from cannabis businesses that are challenging the constitutionality of federal prohibition. Now, in a filing submitted to the court on Monday, U.S. Solicitor General John Sauer, who was appointed by President Trump, said simply, the government hereby waives its right to file a response to the petition in this case unless requested to do so by the court. This comes about a month after the powerhouse law firm Boy Schiller Flexner LLP submitted a petition for a writ of certiorari from the court on behalf of their clients, a coalition of cannabis companies, who are arguing that the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution precludes the federal government from enforcing criminalization laws against interstate cannabis activity. Massachusetts-based cannabis companies and industry leaders Cannon Provisions, Gayassi Cellars, Wiseacre Farm, and Brano Holdings are asking justices to reevaluate a landmark 2005 case, Gonzalez versus Rock, wherein the Supreme Court narrowly determined that the federal government could enforce prohibition against cannabis cultivation that took place wholly within California based on Congress's authority to regulate interstate commerce. Now, a lead attorney representing the plaintiffs recently told Marijuana Moment that he's hopeful, albeit somewhat nervous, about the prospects of justices ultimately taking up the matter and deciding to address the key legal question about the constitutionality of federal cannabis prohibition. Now, the petition companies petition to the Supreme Court of the United States argues that the REC decision was an abbreviation in the court's precedents on the Commerce Clause, a necessary and proper clause, and represents a drastic departure from the federalism principles those clauses embody. Now, the ruling 2 decades ago permitted a dramatic intrusion on the exercise of the state's police powers, it says. Now, the Controlled Substances Act, the significance to the exercise of the state's police powers is massive and even greater today than it was back in the time when only 9 states had legalized cannabis, according to the petition. It goes on to say that 38 states have now decided that the health and safety of their citizens is better served by making cannabis available through regulated channels than through prohibition. The CSA displaces those states' choices and imposes Congress's own views on interstate policy. Now, the serious federalism questions raised by that intrusion warrant the court's attention, as they did in rank. It says the petition that says that after that decision was issued, the federal government has undermined the notion of any link between the CSA's interstate goals and its interstate prohibitions. Now, a U.S. appeals court rejected the arguments of the state legal cannabis companies the firm is representing it back in May. It was one of the latest blows to the high-profile lawsuit following a lower court's dismissal of the claim, but it's widely understood that the plaintiff's legal team has long intended the matter to end up before the 9 high court justices. While it's not clear if SCOTUS will ultimately take the case, one sign that is at least some on court might be interested in the appeal is a 2021 statement from Justice Clarence Thomas, issued as a court denied review of a separate dispute involving Colorado medical cannabis dispensaries. Thomas wrote in that, he says, whatever the merits of right, when it was decided, the federal policies of the past 16 years have greatly undermined its reasoning. And he keeps describing the government's approach to the cannabis enforcement as a half-in, half-out regime that simultaneously tolerates and forbids local use of cannabis through federal law, although federal law still flatly forbids the interstate possession, cultivation, or distribution of cannabis. Now, the government, post-RIC, has sent mixed signals on its views. Now, the justice continued by saying, the situation strains basic principles of federalism and conceals traps for the unwary. They may have a proponent or a justice in favor there, so hopefully, they can rule on that and rule in favor of eliminating, cannabis prohibition. Get rid of it. The lawmakers going at it. Companies are going at it, trying to get things changed. All they can do is keep trying. But I just wish they get it done because it just seems it's just pulling back and forth. Sometimes you get news that sounds good, and then other times there's news that doesn't sound so good. So we'll just see what happens in times. All right, people, that's it. That's the Pace News Report for today. Thanks to our buds at Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, At-Eze.ca, and Limestone City Hydroponics.ca. And in closing, as always, I'd like to say thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching or listening to the podcast that goes out afterwards. But as I always say, don't forget to educate, medicate, and do not incarcerate.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, they offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.